He built his fortune on a business so profitable it made legitimate corporations look small. Rivals whispered that he earned more in a single night than most men saw in a year. Police reports described his operation as untouchable. Politicians publicly condemned him while quietly depending on the money his network generated. And yet the empire that made him a millionaire didn't come from bank heists, drug shipments, or extortion. His fortune came from a business so mundane on the surface, people overlooked it completely. A business that turned ordinary products into gold and gold into power. A business that, when exposed, revealed a secret economy, fueling some of the most dangerous criminal organizations of the 20th century. The twist is this: it wasn't guns, gambling, or booze that first made gangsters rich. It was something far quieter to distribute. The ability to move what others couldn't: cigarettes, sugar, gasoline, medicine, meat, even household goods. Before they were mobsters in expensive suits, they were logistics geniuses with criminal methods. And their real empire wasn't built in back rooms of bars, it was built in warehouses, trucking routes, and supply chains that looked legitimate from the outside but were controlled by men who didn't follow the. But the real story didn't start with organized crime. It started with ordinary people in desperate circumstances and a government scrambling to control an economy on the brink. The groundwork for gangster millionaires was laid long before they showed up to claim the profits. All it took was the right pressure, the right shortages, and the right loopholes. During the early 1900s, American cities were exploding with new arrivals. Immigrants flooded in, industries expanded, and the cost of living soared. The government responded with regulations, price ceilings, rationing laws, restrictions on goods, and heavy taxes designed to shape the market. These policies weren't meant to create criminal opportunities, but that's exactly what they did. Every limit on legal trade opened a door for illegal trade. Every shortage created a demand for someone who could deliver. And the men who figured out how to deliver became the first millionaires of the underworld. Long before alcohol prohibition made headlines, small-time gangs were already running shadow markets. They weren't selling vice, they were selling convenience. When tobacco taxes squeezed shopkeepers, gangsters smuggled cartons. When labor strikes shut down warehouses, gangsters rerouted trucks. When the government rationed sugar during wartime, gangsters hoarded it and sold it at triple the price. They didn't need a banned substance to make money. They needed inefficiency. They needed friction. And America had plenty of both. The turning point came in the 1920s, when one specific shortage changed everything. Alcohol prohibition didn't create criminal intelligence. It simply rewarded the men who already understood distribution. Overnight, the same networks that had quietly moved cigarettes and meat transformed into full-scale bootlegging empires. The skills were already there. The country had just handed them a product that was exponentially more profitable. Some gangsters focused on distilling, others built smuggling fleets. But the real millionaires, the ones who never fired a shot, were the ones who mastered logistics. They negotiated supply in Canada, bribed ports on the coast, ran fleets of trucks through rural roads, and maintained clandestine distribution hubs disguised as dairy barns, pharmacies, bakeries, and fruit companies. It was commerce in its purest form, only darker, faster, and more flexible than anything legitimate businesses could compete with. The government cracked down, but cracking down was exactly what strengthened the criminal economy. Raids eliminated small producers, allowing larger syndicates to swallow their territories. Seized shipments drove prices higher, earning the survivors more. Every attempt to apply pressure pushed the illegal market to evolve. Smarter routes, tighter networks, better intelligence. This wasn't chaos, it was adaptation. As money flooded in, these distribution-based businesses expanded beyond alcohol. If a city ran out of gasoline during a dock worker strike, gangsters stepped in. If a company couldn't transport its perishable goods because union negotiations stalled trucks, gangsters moved them. They became fixers for the flow of everyday goods. And this is where they built the fortunes that survived long after prohibition ended. The key to their power wasn't violence. Violence was simply insurance. The real power was control over supply, over scarcity, over who received what and when. In some neighborhoods, residents depended on them for groceries more than they depended on the state. Their reach grew so deep that some legitimate companies privately preferred working with criminals rather than risk losing everything to regulatory delays or labor disputes. The great economic crisis of the 1930s only deepened this underground economy. With unemployment high and wages low, black markets expanded. Mob-run trucking companies undercut legitimate firms by ignoring operating laws, avoiding insurance, and bypassing taxes. By the time the government realized that organized crime had become an economic force, not just a criminal one, it was already too late. The shadow supply chain was now entwined with the real one. Then came the wartime era, which provided the biggest opportunity yet. The US government imposed strict controls on fuel, rubber, meat, sugar, coffee, metal, nearly everything that mattered. Suddenly, the underground networks that had thrived during past shortages became indispensable again. Gangsters didn't need to sell anything illegal. They simply sold what was hard to find. Rationing coupons were forged or stolen, factory materials were rerouted, military supplies disappeared from ships and reappeared in civilian warehouses. Politicians publicly warned about criminal infiltration while privately relying on the same group to keep their districts supplied. Investigators later revealed that some mob-owned companies received government contracts they were supposed to be competing against. By the 1940s, organized crime had achieved something extraordinary. They were running parallel economies in major cities. A legal supply chain for those who followed the rules, and a legal one for those who needed results. This dual economy didn't disappear after the war. In fact, it grew. Urban development created demand for construction materials and laborers. Garbage collection contracts were awarded to companies with secret criminal partners. Trucking unions were manipulated to guarantee that certain routes remained under mob control. And behind it all, the old business still thrived, the quiet, profitable movement of everyday goods outside the official system. Newspapers focused on the flashy crimes, shootings, extortion, casinos, but the real money, the consistent money, came from distribution rackets. If you controlled a port, you controlled imports. If you controlled a union, you controlled transportation. If you controlled a trucking route, you controlled the market price of every product that moved along it. This was not random criminality. This was vertical integration corporate strategy applied to a legal enterprise. And it worked because the legitimate system continued to have weaknesses. Regulations slowed down companies. Strikes froze supply chains. Taxes made margins tight. Corruption made enforcement uneven. Every crack in the system was an opening, and organized crime filled them with astonishing speed. The breaking point came when law enforcement finally recognized that this business model was just profitably, was foundational. By the 1950s and 60s, commissions and hearings exposed how deeply mob influence had penetrated into unions, trucking corporations, and wholesale markets. But exposing a system and destroying a system are two very different things. Even when leaders were arrested, the business continued. Routes stayed active, warehouses kept operating. Companies with hidden ownership kept winning contracts. The old gangster millionaires knew something that governments often overlooked. Controlling distribution means controlling power. That principle didn't die with them, it simply evolved. Today, the same pattern reappears in new forms. Whenever a market is overregulated, criminals fill the gaps. Whenever a product becomes scarce, someone outside the system steps in to supply it. In some countries, entire sectors, fuel, medicine, food, have parallel legal and illegal distribution systems. In others, black market networks thrive during inflation spikes, currency shortages, or supply crises. The pattern is global, consistent, and deeply predictable. And it doesn't always look like the dramatic stories of the past. Sometimes it's counterfeit electronics. Sometimes it's stolen cargo, quietly unloaded at ports. Sometimes it's tax-free cigarettes smuggled across borders. Sometimes it's fuel diluted, rerouted, or siphoned out of pipelines. The business that made gangsters millionaires never disappeared. It simply changed products and geography. The real secret is this: criminal empires grow fastest when the legal supply chain fails. And history shows that those failures don't start with chaos. They start small. A shortage here, a rule change there, a price spike, a delay, a loophole. A system stretched just thin enough for someone else to step in. The men who built million-dollar empires didn't wait for the world to fall apart. They moved early, quietly, and efficiently. That's why they won. 3 takeaways stand out from this long, hidden history. First, crime follows incentives, not stereotypes. The biggest criminal fortunes weren't built on what was illegal, They were built on what was inconvenient. Second, supply chains are fragile. When they falter, parallel markets emerge instantly, and those markets often become more powerful than the systems they replace. Third, the line between legitimate business and organized crime is thinner than we want to believe. Whenever profits depend on access, scarcity, or control, the door opens for people willing to operate outside the rules. The deeper warning is this: the world is entering an era of new shortages, new regulations, and new vulnerabilities. History suggests that someone, somewhere, is already building the next version of this business, quietly, efficiently, and profitably. If you found this breakdown useful and want more deep dives into the hidden mechanics of power, economics, and history, make sure you subscribe, share the video, and leave a comment on what topic you'd like explored next. The stories only get darker from here.